Think of structure like the sign you see at the mall with the big red dot that says "You are here." It essentially defines how we get to a given place and where we can go once we're done there. We go to a specific screen, we do a few things, and then we say, okay, what's next? Where do we want to go next? Where do we need to go next? Structure also defines categories of information contained within that site or the app or the system or whatever it may be. Structure is created, as we said, by interaction design, which means we're presenting information in a way that people can understand it or interact with it in a way that matches their mental model, that matches their expectation, and that enables them to reach certain goals. Structure is also created by information architecture, which is essentially a combination of organization, labeling, search, navigation, all the things that exist within a digital product that allow you to move through content, understand it, and in some cases manipulate or apply it. Good structure organizes information in a way that provides intuitive access to content, and this bears repeating. Intuitive is a term that often gets misunderstood, but what intuitive really means is single trial learning. Okay, I want you to remember that because it's very, very important. It doesn't mean that we automatically recognize and know how to use everything that we see on the screen. What it really means is that we do it once and we remember it forever. It's easy enough that we can do it one time, and it's not something we're going to have to work to remember how to do the next time. That's really what intuitive means. Single trial learning. Let's talk about how we determine appropriate structure. Think of an axis. On one end, on the left end of the axis, we have things that are very complex, okay? Things that are for more educated audiences who already have a deep understanding of the content or the tasks or actions that are going to take place that have a certain degree of familiarity with what's being presented. At the bottom of the scale, you have things that are very simple, okay? This is basic content. Think of things like training sites. You're going to teach somebody how to do something that they haven't done before, or you're introducing content that's unfamiliar to them in some way. Moving down, we have things like linear narrative. Think of it like the experience of reading a book. You go from page 1 to page 2 to page 3 to page 4 to page 5. That's a very linear, predictable structure. You start at point A, you go to B, to C, to D, to E, to F. Okay, it flows in a very predictive manner. At the far end of that scale, you have nonlinear or hyperlinked structures, which are very flexible, but can also be confusing. And the reason for that is that unlike a linear narrative, you don't go from 1 to 2 to 3 to 4, from A to B to C to D to E. You go from 1 to 6 to 12 to 24 to, okay, you bounce around. A to D to F to H to K to M, all right? It's very different. And because of that, again, it has potential to be confusing. So linear structures like this that proceed in a very orderly, logical pattern are for instances where your content is very simple and your narrative needs to be predictable. Again, you're going to teach somebody how to do something. Step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4. So linear narratives are appropriate in those kinds of situations. Sort of in the middle, we have something that's both linear because it can proceed in an orderly fashion, but it's also somewhat nonlinear in that we can bounce around from the very top page to something on the second tier to back to the first tier, back to the home page. Most websites fall into this category. And notice that as we go up, content is starting to get a little more complex. So this type of structure sort of sits in the middle of all things. It's between simple and complex, and it's between linear and nonlinear. Finally, if we go all the way to the top right, we have structures that are very complex and that are very non-linear in terms of their structure. All right, they're very flexible. You have a lot of choice as to how you can move through the information, but that flexibility assumes that you have a very high degree of understanding already of what the content is, what you're supposed to do, and what you can do. So that type of organization is very appropriate for complex content, for audiences who are very educated on the subject matter, and for situations where it is imperative that you be able to bounce around without being forced into a particular pattern. Okay, so in terms of determining structure, you have to think about who the audience is, what their aptitude is, what their level of understanding is, and what the content is as well, and whether it demands a very linear process or a very flexible process. Now, the trick of this is that structure in any case, okay, whether the content is simple or complex, does have to be flexible. Even if it's a very linear sort of process, it still has to be flexible to accommodate change. Think of it like building a house. You want to structure things in such a way that if you decide 3 years down the road you want to add another room, you want to try to make it easy to do so, even if you're not convinced that you'll have to do that. Let's use the example of a website. Let's say that in March, we launch our website and we've got 8 pages, including the homepage. It's a nice sort of orderly structure. It's right in between simple and complex. It's orderly, but it's still flexible. Okay, you can still get around. You can still move around to different places. But our belief at the time is we need a fairly orderly structure. All right, right now, this is what our audience needs from us. A month later, in April, somebody says, oh, you know what? We need these 3 pages of content that we totally forgot about in March. But it's only April, so, no big deal. Let's add these pages at the bottom level. That's fine. It's still, we haven't screwed up our structure. Still makes sense. We're good. Small change, but we could deal with it. Then in June, project stakeholder gives you a call and says, okay, we got this change. We rolled out a new product and a new service. It sort of fits in with one of our existing categories. So we can probably put it under here. And, there's another new page that has to go in that category that you guys stood up last month. So let's put that there. Notice what's starting to happen. We're sort of adding things in, and the site is growing deeper, which doesn't necessarily lend itself to very simple wayfinding. Okay, the deeper this gets, the harder people have to work to find content. Then in September, wholesale change. You get another call that says, okay, we need to change the organization of some things on the top tier, and we've got these new products and services, and we're not going to sell these other products anymore. And I know that organization we had before made sense, but we're restructuring the way we offer products, and there's support options tied to this new product, and people are going to get confused if it's not in the right place, blah, 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 blah. So what happens? Now you've got this massive, unwieldy structure, and you're having to rebuild a lot of the stuff that you did previously. If the structure is not flexible, it can't properly accommodate this change. And again, now we're at the point where we're just jamming stuff in wherever it fits because we've got technical constraints, we've got design constraints in place, and we're trying like hell not to rebuild everything that we did. This is typically what happens to a lot of websites. They grow over time, and growth is a necessary function of any business, any organization, any service. You can't avoid it. But if you don't plan for that expansion up front in the structure phase, you wind up in this situation where pretty soon you're running out of room. Where are we going to put all this stuff? And not only where are we going to put it, but how are people going to find it? It can become a very, very difficult problem to solve if you don't plan for it up front. Doesn't mean you have to know everything you're ever going to do, but consider what's going to happen technically, design-wise, content-wise, structurally, navigation-wise, if you do have to deal with these things later.